Good afternoon, tubers. This afternoon I just got a quick job I'm doing on my Volkswagen Super Beetle here. I've got to replace the right hand side ball joint, and I just figured I'd video the process because it's actually something you can do at home with fairly minimal tools, but only if you have the right model of Super Beetle. Now, the reason I say that is Volkswagen Super Beetles over the years came with two different styles of McPherson strut front suspension, and only one of them you can do it at home with. Now, the 71 to 73 models have what's known as a 3-bolt setup. I just happen to have the two here to show the difference. And this method only works with the 3-bolt ones, so you can see the early struts here have 3 bolts which bolt the strut to the spindle, whereas the later 74 onwards 2-bolt type just have 2 bolts through the side, hence the name. And that's the way it's still done even today. Under the cover there's my boring modern non-VW mainstream car, and even though it's almost 30 years newer than my Super Beetle, even it, you can see, has that same 2-bolt strut suspension setup because it's the most effective way of doing it. But unfortunately the 2-bolt setup is not as simple. The control arms need removing from the car and then put in a press so the ball joint can be pressed out and a new one pressed in. But luckily the earlier type is not a press fit, so it can be removed, and you can also do it at home without any major tools. I hate using the term redneck method, but probably best describes how I do it. So first thing I've got to do is get it up in the air and get that wheel off. But first, just some basic diagnostic stuff. The McPherson strut front end in Super Beetles obviously is a little bit more complex than the basic torsion bar front end, so being a little bit more complex means there's more to go wrong with them. But the usual problems are just knocking or clunking, particularly when hitting bumps, or the classic Super Beetle shimmy, which is comes in around 50 mile an hour or 80 kilometers an hour, and just a shuddering, shaking coming up through the steering that you feel, and usually disappears when you either slow down or speed up. In my case here, I'm not getting any shimmying or wobbling, but I do occasionally feel a clunk through the steering when I hit bumps on rough roads. So with the front end up in the air, there's several areas to check. With mine, by grabbing the right hand side wheel top and bottom and rocking it, I was feeling the play there, but nowhere else. So when I rocked the wheel like that, I could see the movement in the ball joint just there, and the control arm wasn't moving, so I knew it was the ball joint. But the other places you would check for movement are the inner control arm bushing in there, the outer bushing where the sway bar goes through, the front sway bar bushings here, and the upper strut bearing. Those are all the suspension related areas that can cause problems. And finally, just the various steering components, starting with the obvious steering box checked for free play. Got the steering damper and its mount, the centre drag link with its ball joints in either end, and the inner and outer tie rod ends. And finally, over the passenger side, the idler arm. The bushings are much better designed in the later 2-bolt cars like this, rather than the earlier ones. Okay, so I got that wheel off, so if we look in behind there, you can see it's a 3-bolt setup. Even though I've got aftermarket adjustable struts, it still mounts up the same. A common mistake people make is they just pop the hood and look at the top of the strut towers and see 3 bolts there and think, oh yeah, it's all good, I got 3-bolt struts, no problem. But they're all like that all the way through. So by now there's probably a couple of smart cookies out there that have worked out something's not quite right here. This is a 74 Super Beetle, but the suspension is the 73 and earlier 3-bolt setup. This car was 2-bolt suspension in a past life when it was new. That'll be the damn phone. And I changed it over to the 3-bolt suspension a while back. So that's the only reason I can do this process. So there is the problem child there. That's the ball joint. And you can see there's a new one to go in it there. And the beauty of these ones, you can see it's just got a tapered shaft, and there's an old shitty control arm there with the matching tapered hole through it. So all it needs is a good whack, basically, but depends how long they've been in there as to how tight they are. And I'm expecting this one to be tight, because it has been in there for at least 20 years, because this 3-bolt suspension that I've fitted to it is from my first Beetle, which I bought in 1995, and they were old ball joints then. Now, I have replaced the left-hand side one already. It went in a few years ago. There are 2 differences I'll just show. So this side here is actually an original German one, and you can see on them there is a lot of thread sticks out the bottom of the shaft there, and it also has a flat on that side and the other. So it's got flats on either side, which allows a 7mm spanner to lock on, so you can hold that while you undo the spanner. Whereas I replaced this side a few years ago, and the newer ones now, a bit hard to see in this light, have an Allen key hole up in the bottom of them. And there goes that fucking phone again. Oh my god. But a lot less thread sticking through the bottom. You can see why on this side that still has the wheel attached. 17-inch wheels, you got a bit of clearance there, but imagine that was a 15-inch wheel or a 14-inch. That would rub very nicely on there. So that's why they make them shorter, with the Allen key bolt up inside. Allen key hole rather. Okay, so first thing I've got to do is pop that nut off. Now normally I'd be a lazy shit and just use the rattle gun on this, but for the sake of not making a heap of noise on video, I'll do it the old fashioned way. 19mm spanner. And 7mm to lock it. That was a little bit looser than it should have been. And done. So there's a couple of ways you can go from here. You can take the 3 bolts out and separate the spindle and the ball joint so that this bit's free, and then try putting a spanner on the 2 flats and twisting. Quite often that'll break them loose. As I said, there's 2 wings either side there and a dimple in the bottom, which allows for a puller to get on there. Or this is what I call the Redneck Method, which I've learnt off YouTube a while back. First thing to do is take the weight under the control arm with a jack. I always use this little lug here as a locator so it doesn't slip. So I've just taken the jack, put it under the control arm. You can see using that little lug to stop it sliding. And I've just taken the weight just enough that it's lifted off the jack stand a bit. It's harder with this bug because I have quite stiff springs and a very heavy duty sway bar, but I've now gone and put a socket that's a nice neat fit in between the ball joint and the control arm. That's a 19mm, but every socket kit will be a bit different, and it'll be good if people stop texting me so I can work. So now I'll just give that a couple of whacks. So as I said, this one is going to be very, very, very tight because it's been in for so long. No. Bingo. That has freed it up. So all I've done now is just remove the 3 bolts which hold the strut and spindle to the ball joint. And luckily the spindle is staying attached to the strut. The standard ones do that normally anyway because they're such a tight fit and rust together, but these aftermarket ones usually are a little bit looser so can sometimes separate. Now, all I've got to do now is get that down far enough so I can lift this old ball joint up and out of the control arm and drop the new one in. Now, easiest way to do that is a wrecking bar in through there and pry down on the sway bar. A little bit trickier in this case because that's a stiffer aftermarket sway bar, but it should still work. Old one out. And new one in. There it all is back together. It's a really good idea to just go for a very short drive around the block. When you get back to check the tension on all the nuts and bolts that have been undone, and even other ones like tie rod ends and brake lines and stuff like that. You can never be too cautious with brakes and suspension. So just a bit of an autopsy on the old one here. I've just popped the rubber dust boot off and cleaned all the old grease out so you can see a bit better what's going on, but it is well and truly shagged. You can see the swivelling ball and socket in there, and it's a bit hard to see on camera, but it has in-out movement in the joint, and it's just sloppy and loose in general, which is all just down to wear and tear and old age.